Hi, everybody. My name is Milo Keller. I'm the Program Assistant for Sustainable Energy and Environment. The beginnings of my lifelong political obsession that eventually led me here to FCNL began with one very specific moment. My grandfather deciding to tell 13-year-old me exactly what he thought about Rudy Giuliani. I know, throwback, right? It was the primary season of the 2008 presidential campaign, and my grandfather, a lifelong public interest lawyer who had fought against housing segregation and political corruption in Chicago, had a few choice words for old Rudy that, for the sake of FCNL's nonpartisan mission, I probably shouldn't repeat right now. I, however, had no problem repeating them verbatim to my classmate the next day while we debated who would make a better president in 2008. I followed Barack Obama's campaign religiously. I was inspired by his message of hope and change, even though I didn't fully understand why so many of us were so hungry for those things at the time. This political obsession never waned for me, as my grandfather and I to this day discuss the latest political issues, email each other the latest articles, and talk to each other on the phone regularly about everything in politics. While some listen to music or enjoy catching up on social media on their morning commutes, I fire up the latest Nerdy Politics podcast and Twitter and try to listen and read at the same time. So, when I was working towards finishing my degree in, you probably guessed it by now, political science, I knew I needed to find a way to put this passion into practice. That's when I saw FCNL's job posting on one of those websites that I'd been scouring so relentlessly. Growing up in a non-Quaker family, I had no connection to Quakerism or even really much organized religion as a kid. The closest thing my hippie-leaning parents got to going to church was taking me and my brother to an interfaith service in a barn in the middle of the Northern California countryside at the very most once a month. But FCNL's work on the environment really inspired me. Every summer since my family moved to California in 2001, my parents took my brother and I on backpacking trips through the Sierra Mountains, the Pacific Northwest, and the Canyonlands of Utah. We always made it a point growing up to get outside as much as possible. As a kid who was somewhat skeptical of spirituality or concepts of God, I always felt most connected to a sense of spirit and interconnectedness out there in the wilderness. The great outdoors took on an even larger meaning in my life during my sophomore year of college. In the winter of 2016, my mother unexpectedly passed away. My brother, cousin, and I were visiting my grandparents at the time, and we'd been planning a 3-week-long, 200-mile backpacking trip along the John Muir Trail from Yosemite National Park to the top of Mount Whitney in California for some time. We knew then that we had to go through with it, but this time as a tribute to my mother's memory. Though the trip was physically the most difficult thing I have ever done, complete with 12 concurrent blisters from worn-out hiking boots and a week of near starvation when some of our cheese blocks spoiled, the time I had out there was truly priceless. Carrying a container of my mother's ashes along the most beautiful area of the country she loved the most, scattering them off of the highest point in the contiguous United States as the sun rose above the mountaintops in the distance, is the most intense and gratifying thing I ever will do. And so seeing FCNL's language of a moral imperative to act on climate change really spoke to me. I saw an opportunity to meld my passion for politics, my deep reverence for the great outdoors, and my need to work for systematic change. Because that systematic change is what our world needs right now. We no longer have time for half measures, and we no longer have time for waffling over how hard bold action on climate change may be. As the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report and now the National Climate Assessment makes very clear, we have roughly 12 years to revolutionize the world economy away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy sources, or we will face catastrophic consequences. Sea levels will rise, driving millions from their homes in places close to us, like Florida, Alaska, and places like Southeast Asia and eventually around the world. The fires that got within 10 miles of my childhood home a little over a year ago and took the homes of many people close to me will only get worse and more frequent. The world is going to see a migrant crisis the likes of which we have never, ever seen. So as we hurtle toward this deadline, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle are slowly starting to act and acknowledge this reality and starting to act on it. But they are not doing so quickly enough. We need to apply pressure, and we need to apply it on a massive grassroots level. Just as FCNL will continue to work and advocate our values in the Senate and House offices on the Hill, we all need to continue to advocate for our values, and we need to commit to go to work today. We must meet with our representatives. We must organize our friends and our family. We must raise awareness through local media, because it is not too late. Even when things seem bleak, I am continually inspired by FCNL's lobbying work and work with our grassroots network to advocate for the faith-based imperative to act on climate change that we all believe in. The task is far from over. On the contrary, in many ways it has just begun. A different congressional landscape awaits us next year, and with that landscape comes new challenges and new opportunities for productive relationships. We need to keep pushing, and we need to keep fighting, but in a Quaker kind of way. Thank you.